economy of slavery. Slaves were assets, credit, debt, and currency. Their bodies were akin to capital and wealth. Between 1820 and the Civil War, black banks across the South issued notes with images of slaves printed on the money. And Sven Becker, Seth Rockman have done excellent work here showing that slaves were not just the generators of cotton production, but they were collateral used to finance the institution. Slavery modernized credit markets, creating complex new forms of financial instruments and trade networks through which slaves could be mortgaged, exchanged, and used as leverage to purchase more slaves. Americans and the British built fortunes on slavery and defended the institution with law and violence. Without getting their hands dirty, the British developed the common law on contract to protect their overseas investments. In the end, the Union won the Civil War thanks to Grant and Sherman, but also thanks to Lincoln's greenbacks and the Supreme Court's decisions to uphold the legal tender cases and the issuing of fiat currency. Greenbacks bankrupted the South, the Southern banking system that was issuing their own currency, and allowed the Union troops to buy provisions. As Keynes says of legal tender, the state claimed the right not only to enforce the dictionary, but to write it, in this case with new money.
Hi, this is VOW, Voices of Wisdom, the show that might not be for everybody, but everybody needs to watch this show. The title today is called Slavery, History Today, and the clip you just saw was by Professor Varadiran. And today, she covered a lot of things about slavery. And slavery is a hard topic to talk about, but we're going to talk about it today. And today's guest is Dr. Georgette Greer-Key, and we're going to try to cover the effects of slavery and the benefits of slavery. So let's jump right into it. The first quote I'm going to talk about is history teaches, but no, we have no pupil. Rewind. History teaches, but has no pupils. And that was by a quote by Professor Antonio Kratsky. So let's jump right into it, Georgette.
Wow.
Dr. Georgette.
Thank you for having me. That was a lot to unpack.
I know that was a lot to unpack,
Yes,
I know.
Yes.
And let's jump right in. Why was there a need for slavery? Let's just start there.
Well, they needed free labor. They needed free labor to build the country, not just build the country, we always say that a lot. They actually built the economy. And so without enslaved people, as you heard, there wouldn't be economy, there wouldn't be in America. And so I think that's really important for us to look at that and look at the numbers, look at the data. I mean, America's wealth was built on, forced, free, and trafficked labor. And I think the other thing is when we think about not that they were just here as 3/4 of a person, they were a commodity. They were a commodity.
Which she just mentioned.
Yeah, commodity, traded, And so we don't really talk about that we built the economy as well. And so without us, the economy that exists would not have the foundation that it has.
And the thing that we think about, we know that there's records or there's shown or there's said that white people were slaves too. But for how long and for the extent? So why do you think they chose us as black people?
Well, let's just unpack that too, because
Okay.
When we say, you will hear, that come back, that there were, white persons were enslaved. Well, actually, it was indentured. And if you simply look up the definition of indentured, it is really saying that there's a contract involved. And so that contract involved is something that you entered into. See, African Americans and enslaved Africans couldn't enter into a contract, that's number one. And that you also wanted to come here. You came here because you wanted passage in order to come to this country. So you were paying off that debt of wanting to come here on your own accord and own volition. And then the other thing about that is that there was an end date for after the contract is done. They immediately were free, immediately able to enjoy the labors and the liberties of what, raciality of a white person could do at that time. That's not so for an enslaved person. First of all, African Americans are the only and first involuntary immigrants to come to this country. They were born here against their will, against their volition. They were actually stolen. Not all of them were like, as a representative of in Africa, if there was a war, they would take prisoners and they sold them off because they were the enemy and spoils of war. No, people were actually stolen from their homes, from their tribes, packed into inhumane conditions, beaten, making the journey alone could be another long story. But the fact is that they did not enter into a contract, and even after slavery ended, right? There still would be 160 plus years that they still weren't able to immediately afford the freedom that the counterparts of the white indentured servants came to enjoy. And we still are feeling the respects of not being able to fully partake and enjoy in the liberty.
And the simple thing comes down to this. It came down to color.
Oh, yeah, I didn't answer that question, but you're
Go
right.
ahead.
It is more than color, too.
I'm saying
It-
how
it's-
they were able
Yeah,
to.
why it became us? Why did they
Why
settle
it
on
was
us?
able to actually, be accepted easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
That they were free, according to, instead of having,
Yeah.
a person of color.
And also, again, with the ability to withstand disease. Okay, so think about the conditions that they were coming over here, packed in like sardines, in their own, skirmin, people they don't know, blood starving, can't, famines would come up top aboard and have to jump around to exercise their muscles, so that they wouldn't have atrophy and putting gunpowder, powder on them to make them look healthy. And even today, when we talk about our health, disproportionately, African Americans have high blood pressure. And that's not, some of us can pull back on, some of the salt and different things like that. But the bigger part of the story is that when we look at the salt water and coming over here, that was a part of that high blood pressure. So they were able to withstand the disease. That, just forget about the high blood pressure, but all the other unsanitary disease. We know that there were many people that were, that died off or even pushed over the boat. So that's when it became racialized, because we were able to withstand the disease. And of course, with the color and melanin in our skin as well, we start to see that we were able to be in the sun, because we came from an environment where there was sun.
I'm going to talk about Isabel Wilkerson's book.
Oh, yes.
It's called The Caste, The Origin of Discontent. And she simply defines a caste system is an artificial construction, a fixed and embedded ranking of human value that sets the presumed supremacy of one group against the presumed inferiority of another group. And right after that, the other thing that was very interesting, that Ava DuVernay, she ended up doing a movie called Origin. And I'm just going to read really quickly something she said. Because the interesting thing about it was how it was related, or how actually the Nazis got how America treated blacks in slavery, and they used that to use against the Jewish people. But Ava says, it took me a really long time to wrap my brain around the idea that there's something underneath racism that's called caste. It doesn't mean racism doesn't exist. It means the foundation, the root, the origin underneath it is very simple, a simple premise. Someone has to be better than someone else. And even in that movie, it was so interesting to see. I think they call them the untouchables, and how they were treated very low, and how they had to work, doing feces, working with feces and all that kind of stuff. So what is your take on that when it talks about the relationship of this slavery and how they were treated, and how they look at the United States and use the United States rather to identify how to treat people?
Well, I think when we talk about slavery in this country, I think that there is a few things that make it uniquely different. People often go back to the historical slavery that we see in biblical times, or even that was in Africa, but it was never what American slavery was. When we talk about American slavery, one of the things that we have to talk about is that you became chattel slavery. So not only, even though we don't believe that another human being can own another human being, basically the premise was, not do I only own you as an enslaved person, I own your bloodline, right? So that's your children and your children's children. So that's what makes it the chattel. But the other thing that makes it uniquely American too is the fact of the cruelty that was able to happen. And then let's come to our government that was able to federally and legislate by law and create a constitution that protected slavery, and that protected the owners over the people. So when we look at the hypocritical documents, that's why we are constantly trying to test them, because again, in the Constitution is our right to redress the government if we have any, discrepancies on how the laws are being played out. So it is our right to redress. And so when looking at that redress, we have to talk about that the country federally legislated and approved slavery. And so with that no end in sight, of course, if Hitler's coming over here to look at how he can do the atrocities that he was able to do, he saw the cruelty, he saw packing us into a certain place, he saw pushing our indigenous and native population to, reservations in different land. So, and it's well documented that Hitler learned the cruelty that he did by seeing what was going on in America. And not only that, not just the cruelty, he also saw how much money they made. We just heard the clip, and they, enslavers made like $159 million between 1820 and 1860. So it's always an economic component too that you have to add on to, and it's not just the cruelty, it's also the economic factor that often gets swept under the rug. So that's a lot of human capital. All right, that was squandered,
Absolutely.
abused,
Absolutely.
and the psychological of that through generations, we see that manifesting. But yeah, eugenics, right? You hear that eugenics, that was a part of him. That was over here trying to make our heads bigger, or we don't feel pain, so they would take enslaved women and do gynecological experiences, experiments with no medication, no consent, and so when we think about all of those things, we have a lot to thank Black women for.
Absolutely.
Because of the field of our oppression, what we went through, but also even the fact that we uplift that women even have to give consent to have a surgery. But all of those things are just not enough to really encapsulate what slavery has been. You also said that it's up to today. And I just have to say, I'm starting to hear some more eugenics talks in today's news. When people say the smartest, the brightest, and and it's assumed that there's a certain superiority of people because now they're putting things against, the strongest, the brightest. See, that's that eugenics talks that is really very disruptive to American society and to all of us. So I think that we have to pay attention to that kind of language that we're hearing.
I can't help but think about how they really began to press how we were belittled, or we were less than. And I think about the movie that they showed, The Birth of the Nation, which was like really messed up. But even talking about the violence, we have this thing where they portray that, Black people are more criminal, more violent, et cetera. But when you do your history, when you think about how they hung us, how they cut off our, gentle, how they, what they did to men, how they burned them alive in front of their families. I mean, what kind of evil was that compared to what they call us to be, deemed us to be violent and criminals? So those are things that really challenge me too, and it comes down to, what they portrayed us to be. When we know we came from kings and queens, we were intelligent, we were intellects. So this is a thing, that's really challenged me. So let's go to the next phase of this, dealing with education.
Okay.
Comparing the educational part. I mean, they wouldn't even allow us to read.
No.
So
Another only, the only, population it was illegal to read and write, and illegal for someone to teach you to read and write.
And then the government stated this, it was illegal. So
Yeah.
continue to.
Well, that's a big part of it, the education, and, I'm sure we'll go into that further, but, it was a part of, the tools and mechanisms and methodology that they use to do the cruelty. And that's why the education was important. Because, when you think about what a society is made of, if we take all of that away from them, first of all, let's strip them of their names, right? Strip them of their names, strip them of their religion, so they don't know who they are and they don't have an identity. Or deem their religion to be heathenistic.
Exactly.
So now it's a process to take away the human in someone. And that's what they did, take them away from their home, separate the families. And like you said, the cruelty, the terror. It was terror.
It was.
Terrorism. Let's whip this one till the skin comes off and line up everybody, all the other enslaved, so they can watch. And they know that this is a warning, don't you do this.
And then the other thing with that, I remember seeing a picture where it said family affair. And not only did they line up the people to show that they were torturing their family or their husband or whatever, but they also had, the master had their family all dressed up like Sunday best and saying basically, this is how you treat the people.
Yeah, yeah. And even though, we come to this country in chains, we still were able to bring something from the diaspora with us deep down, deep down where the memory is that doesn't go. And so even though you went through that cruelty, we still were able to tell stories orally.
Absolutely.
When we think about our hair, we brought secrets with us in our hair. We had seeds in our hair. We had messages in our hair. We braided maps in our hair so that we know how to escape. And so even though we were not allowed to be traditionally educated in their standpoint, we still were educated.
Absolutely.
There's a difference between being illiterate and intelligent.
Absolutely.
You could be intelligent and still be illiterate. And so I think that worked for on the behalf of us because we knew how to organize ourselves in terms of creating that what they call now a chosen family, because your family was stripped from you. So whoever you were there with became your family. The songs that they learned, incorporating African traditions in Christianity that we still see today and still practice. So, but that was purposeful because if you don't know your history, that's why they strip it. What are you going to do if you don't know your history?
Absolutely.
Who are you if you don't know your history?
Absolutely.
So you don't know who you are. But they're telling you, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that. What do you think happens? That's the dehumanizing part of it. And even though there was that dehumanizing part of it, thank goodness that we had some resilience and we knew who we were. I mean, talk about ancient societies. I don't want to get into a controversy here, but they talk about the Greeks. Well, the Greeks came to learn from the Africans.
It's true.
Right? We already had math and science and building technology and wealth in the country. So that's a part of that education where they're turning the facts around
Absolutely.
to meet their needs. So we see that happening even now. But we just have to remember there's a difference between illiterate and intelligent.
Absolutely.
And we were a very intelligent people.
I've had an incident where, the schools was afraid or didn't want to teach slavery. And so we have an issue, we have a challenge with the educational system, which is interesting where how we're going to pass on to the next generation how we should be treated if they really don't know how we were treated, if you understand.
Yeah, I think we really have to talk about that because we do see when we say legacy, usually you hear the word legacy, you think it's something good, and it usually is. But not when we say the legacies of slavery that are still with us, in terms of stereotyping us and putting forth an image that is not representative of us, that still happens. I think in terms of the amount of segregation that we still live with right now today, that segregation really affects a lot of things. It affects our health, right? is where do they usually put us, or they usually put a dump or something in those communities. So that affects us. Where we live affects where our children get educated, because how do they fund education? Through property tax. But even though it's funded through property tax, you throw all of the derelict stuff in our community, so our properties are devalued, businesses don't move in, so we don't have any commercial funding tax. So all the nonprofits are in there, nothing's on the tax roll, so this affects our schools.
Absolutely.
And if your schools are affected, it affects your ability to really be a contributing society in terms of where you can work, what kind of job you can get, what kind of degree you can get. So it's by design, but it starts off with slavery.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Separate and unequal, was a thing that was fought, but guess what? We're still living in those same times. So I think we need to talk about those legacies of slavery that we live with.
And I can't help to think about the two movies that came out that we never knew of. That one with is called, what was it called again? With the Nassau?
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures. And Creole Katherine Johnson, she was an amazing mathematic. And she's the one who really she was instrumental in Nassau. She was critical in that. And I saw a quote that said that she was a computer when computers wore skirts. I love that. And then the other movie that just came out, the 6888, and that was the 6888 Central Postal Battalions. They were all black battalion of the U.S. Army the U.S. Army Corps, that managed the postal system. And their quote was, "No mail, low morale." And they had to get if you watch the movie, and I suggest everyone please watch that movie. It's called the 6888. And it's really important to see how important it was that they did what they did, but they were actually told that they put this on them, that they thought that they were never going to succeed. They had all this mail. I mean, you have to see the movie. But even talking about incarceration.
Oh, Lordy.
I think we have not too much long time to.
We don't.
But we'll talk about that, and we're going to kind of end with that. But talk about that part of the incarceration part of it.
Yeah, because, I didn't even get in when we think about the transatlantic slave, period. But we never even talk about the second wave of we call it not Atlantic, but the second transatlantic and domestic slave trade. Because after 1807, we know that Congress abolished slavery here, but they're like, look, we still need somebody to pick these crops. We still need to have enslaved people. So I think it was Maryland and Virginia. They actually inbreeded, like 500,000 of enslaved persons to go work. So just because it was legislated to end slavery, guess what? They still needed somebody to do the work. So just making a connection between the transatlantic slave trade, also the second wave of the domestic transatlantic, not transatlantic, but trans-domestic slave trade. And then after we ended slavery, what happens next? Here we have the chain gang. And so with the chain gang is also, even before the chain gang, let's just think about the Civil War happened, it's supposed to end, but immediately the people who wanted to, escape from America and create their own they succeeded from America, they wanted to create their own country, they failed, they lost, and now right after the war, these same traitors, right, these traitors of the country, and terrorists, homegrown terrorists in the South, now are getting put back in position. And so what do? We got to figure out how to keep this free labor going. So they create the chain gang. People were being locked up illegally for things they didn't do, just like they're still being today.
Absolutely.
That they still didn't do, and they will be in the jails. And what happens? The government and the owners and the businesses would go to those jails and use the free labor there. And now today we have the privatized jail complex, which still exists and disproportionately. There's only, African Americans make up 13% of the population, but in the jails, we're up there in 92% that are housed in the jails. And even today, with some of your cell phones, some of your potatoes, and a lot of different things that you purchase are made in jail with free labor. And let's not forget that when we talk about slavery, you have to read the 13th Amendment, because it's
Absolutely.
still in there that says, unless found guilty and tried for a crime. And so that is still legalized slavery, because we know when you look
Absolutely.
at the numbers, disproportionately African-American males are found guilty wrongfully and even arrested wrongfully, and have even lost their lives on death row wrongfully.
Absolutely.
And no one has done anything about it. So again, is slavery done in this in this society today? Well, the 13th Amendment says otherwise. And the statistics that we have also say otherwise. So until we address that need of looking at the prison systems and not allowing the prisons to make money and be a private business, we're still dealing with slavery in our society today.
Absolutely. We could go on and on and on, but the topic today, slavery history today. And we are, right now, we're living in a very interesting time. And we're going to continue, we have to continue to talk about this topic. And
Absolutely.
thank you so much
Thank you.
for being here. And this was VOW, Voices of Wisdom, the show that might not be for everybody, but everybody needs to watch this show. Have a great day.